to the lunch break on day 39 of the Undercover Policing Inquiry, Tranche 2, Phase 2. We've been listening to more evidence of Tony Waite, HN115, the Spycops manager, the guy who was Chief Superintendent of the SDS and then went on to be head of C Squad within Special Branch. I'm joined by Chris Bryan of the Undercover Research Group. What have you made of his evidence so far this morning?
Broadly continuation, wasn't it? I guess there wasn't maybe so many in that last section. Actually, one of the more interesting things was about passing on intelligence regarding animal rights and also intelligent arms companies to private companies, List X companies. They're called, I guess. They were the ones that provided extra security. He was. He seemed that was the implication was that was a legitimate. Passing on the names wasn't legitimate, but also passing on information to other companies which weren't on this magic list X, wasn't legitimate again.
We also had, we saw a note from Stella Rimington, the Dame, where it was Tony Waite said that it was to do with a discussion around this thing about who should be in charge of policing animal rights extremism, as they call it. It's recorded that Tony Waite said the pharmaceutical companies were running their own undercover operations inside animal rights, and they were also putting a lot of pressure on the on Special Branch to provide more information and intelligence to them.
It's no secret that the pharmaceutical industry were heavily lobbying the government on all levels. I suppose it is slight news that Tony Waite himself or Special Branch were getting direct pressure themselves. The other thing is that the other part of that is that first, I should say that most MI5 officers aren't named, but the ones who went on to become director of MI5, because their names in the public domain, they're the only ones whose names we get to see. But so Waite was very much like fighting for the SDS's patch there, I think. Obviously. This 1989, that document, was it? Something 1989, 1990, so getting towards the end, if not the end of the Cold War, so subversion becoming less useful as a tool to justify the operations, if any justification was necessary, of course. So we're obviously suggesting that this wasn't, we heard yesterday about the idea that because animal rights stuff involved much more criminal acts, and then that should be a standard CID matter rather than a Special Branch one. But there, again, we can see that we're arguing against that on the basis that SDS's tool of deep infiltration.
Yeah, absolutely. We heard a lot more about HN109, who's the other manager who we're going to hear from next week. There was discussion about Stefan Scutt again. Tony Waite's been really, really bullish about his defence of Scutt.
He's basically a denialist. Basically, Scutt, there's a mountain of evidence that suggests Scutt was a corrupt and dishonest officer, even at the point that, on his application to become a police officer. It started there and ended when he actually got sacked eventually. It seems very odd that Waite is still in this deep denial about how awful Scutt was as a police officer. We can only guess at the motivations with that. Is he still friends with him? Has Scutt got something on him? Who knows?
Yeah, it sounds like if they're not friends now, they were friends then, at the very least. We heard a lot about the internal discussions within Special Branch between the SDS and C Squad. He said that most business within Special Branch was done informally. It wasn't written down. There were weekly meetings where they discussed things. So it was particularly about the tasking he was questioning at the time. He said, but most of it would be dealt with in the corridor. I think he said the vast majority of business was informal. You kind of got the impression that these were good chaps. Dealing with things in an informal manner. There was no need to write anything down. There was no need for any sort of paper trail to exist when it came to all that sort of thing.
It is very much the missing dimension, that all these things which weren't recorded. To me, from the very beginning of the inquiry, it's surprising how much controversial stuff was written down. The miscarriages of justice, where we had a number of Special Branch officers intervening in the magistrates' courts but also them writing that down. There being this string of emails, typed memos outlining their interference with the court process. So, but I always thought that's like tip of the iceberg. Probably for those, I guess for those who gave it any thought, they wouldn't have written that stuff down. So, of all these known cases of miscarriages, for instance, and other issues, there's probably 100 more which weren't written down.
Yeah, I mean, I think it sort of suggests that, like, because they were so used to the informality, they were so used to things not being recorded, they became quite unguarded. So then occasionally things were written down because they were in meetings or there was a note sent or whatever, and they kind of reveal themselves. We saw a bit about when he was asked about John Dines, and he said, oh yeah, he used to use this uncomplimentary Australian slang word about activists, but he couldn't remember what it was. And he said, was he derogatory about activists? He said, oh well, not unduly derogatory. It was like all the undercover cops were derogatory about activists. I mean, John Dines wasn't special about that, and he's kind of pushed on it. Did that involve a derogatory conversation about female activists and their appearance? And he's like, probably, but he doesn't recall any detail of it.
Yeah, we don't know what this Australian word was, but maybe Waite is getting confused that he thought that Weary's tag was an Australian thing for some reason, but I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know any Australian slang words. If anybody who is watching knows any Australian slang words that might refer to activists, suggest them in the comments below. Yeah, I'm trying to think what else was talked about. There were a few other things. I mean, the problem is that particularly with this witness, we're getting a lot of David Barr. We're getting a lot of very long questions, and then answers of just possibly, probably, can't recall, which means. As a witness, he's not particularly easy to follow. I mean, and certainly when you want to scroll back to see exactly what he said, you want to check all you're seeing is just big banks of information from David Barr, which he's then pretty much agreeing with. To be fair, I mean, there's been a few things which he's completely denied all knowledge of at all, and just said he didn't know about. But the majority of things, he goes, probable, possible. It's that sort of thing.
Oh yeah, he's admitted a lot, but in very anti-dramatic terms. As I was saying earlier, that some of the things that he's admitting to, if this was like a criminal court case, then he would be basically landing himself a guilty verdict. But in terms of like the drama, or that is definitely lacking in his responses to Barr's questions.
I mean, there was a whole section which was really deplorable about the women. He says that they made their choice. They know what they were doing. And it was put to him, it wasn't an informed choice. And he said, he couldn't imagine that they would have changed their opinion at all, knowing these men were undercover officers.
He said it was partially informed, didn't he?
Yeah, partially informed. Yeah. It was perfectly natural. This is what happens when you put young men and young women together. It's really, I mean, some of the comments were absolutely awful.
Well, I don't know if you remember. Sorry. I don't know if you remember, it was actually brought up Robert Mark, who was the Commissioner of Metropolitan Police in the early to mid-1970s. In his autobiography, he mentioned there was a suggestion that women officers should be barracks at Hendon. Right. And basically what he said was that if that happened, then, we just need an on-site abortionist, basically. That was more or less what he said. So it kind of just follows with that kind of attitude, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, he's clearly got a very. He's got some very misogynistic views, despite the fact that yesterday he said he wasn't really a misogynist because he's been married for 60 years. He was asked about the racist attitudes of certain officers. He said, he never witnessed any of that. We've heard informally from people that he used racist terminology himself quite regularly. So apparently the comment about a mixed race baby that had resulted from Bob Lambert's fathering a child with Jackie was in fact that he used the N-word in that setting. Apparently, it's been said. There've been a few times where he's been invited. He's no, there was no racism. This person wasn't racist. That person wasn't racist.
Clearly, he's not going to recognise racism at all, is he? Or sexism, or homophobia. And so these questions were a bit like asking, I don't know, Hitler. Whether he was anti-Semitic or not. I mean, it's just like, I don't know. Yeah. I mean, that was. I mean, the whole stuff about
his prejudices, particularly his prejudices around women. You know, it was very dismissive. He admitted that he was very dismissive of the concerns of the women. He was dismissive of the impact that any of this had on them. He comes back to the fact that it was good intelligence by good officers. He said that John Dines still deserved his commendation because he gave good reports. He said it was put to him, yet this long-term emotional and sexually deceptive relationship with Helen Steele had happened. And he said, yeah, well, that didn't change his opinion of John Dines in the least.
I mean, I suppose that the surprising thing is he's not trying to pretend otherwise. So this is what we've had more, isn't it? That people have moderated their views to say things which are more socially acceptable now, whereas this guy doesn't seem bothered at all, at least in those respects. Yeah, I mean, it's just a shame that really that his memory of specific instances, so we don't get the interesting detail on his take on, for instance, all those miscarriages that he and others were involved with, or Bob Lambert's arrests. We don't have that. The story is not being added to, is it, with most of his testimony?
No, not at all. Not at all. I mean, that's really sort of typifies it. He's just kind of just accepting as opposed to adding any real detail himself.
But I think before, if it was like another officer, one of the earlier managers we heard from before, like Butler, we would have thought that would have been part of the tactic, just to not admit any wrongdoing, where he is forgetting all the detail but broadly accepting all the wrongdoing, which is, I think, unique combination so far.
Yeah, you know, he's definitely a different witness to anything we've had so far. I mean, he just doesn't seem to care anymore. He really doesn't seem to care. I think that's about it, really. Is there anything you want to add? Thanks for joining. That was the end of Bar's questions. There will be further questions, follow-up questions, which we presented to Bar to be presented to Tony Waite after lunch. Those 10, I mean, so it can go on for a little while, but it probably won't be that long. I will do another recap video after that. But yeah, thanks for joining. It's going to be an early finish today, which is great for us. No one's sitting tomorrow. There's no witness tomorrow. That's been moved around. We've got Michael Couch on Thursday. That's the undercover officer who attended the raid at Bob Lambert's house when he had a raid on him when everybody else was raided after the Debenhams thing. So that'll be interesting. But yeah, there's more to come from Tony Waite this afternoon. So see you this afternoon. Cheers.